Okay, so you can see my setup here. I have the backdrop with a nice curve in it so that there's not any wrinkles or dents. I have my figure set up on the backdrop. This is going to be my dramatic shot against the black backdrop. So I only have one figure right now. You could use multiple for this. To show depth, you really probably want to use multiple figures, but this one I thought it'd be cool to do like a nice close-up of his head for this one. So I'm gonna go and get my camera set up. It's level with my character. I am gonna use a low ISO so my pictures are not grainy. So make sure you choose a 1 or 200 ISO. This is gonna mean it's gonna be low lighting. Your shutter speeds are gonna be very slow because you've chosen a low ISO. Your camera's very, it's not very sensitive to the light with a low ISO. So that's okay though because you're on a tripod. If you're on a tripod, it does not matter how slow your shutter speed gets if you're taking a picture of something that's still, as we are here, the toy is still. So I have a low ISO. I'm also gonna put on a low f-stop. So I'm gonna choose the low f-stop. Hold the AV plus or minus, go low. And then I'm gonna use the light meter to meter my light and to choose the shutter speed for me. So for these pictures, I'm just gonna use my cell phone light that's easily accessible at home. So you can use a cell phone light. If it's too bright, you can place a tissue over the light to kind of diffuse the light. So let's see. I kind of like the brightness. It'll be more dramatic. And I'm in a darkish room so I can get some drama. So I can decide what, if I put my light low, if I put it high, however I want that to look. So I'm gonna zoom in, set up the shot, and I'm gonna try to get some drama here. Actually, I think it would be kind of cool to include that cast shadow. So I'm not zoomed too far in here. Okay, and make sure that you don't include the edge of the backdrop. Get rid of any distractions, get it nice and focused. And then I'm gonna meter the light with this. I'm gonna put it at the 0, and it says it's a 2-second or 1.6 exposure. Let's just see how that looks. At a 1.6 second shutter speed, it's actually really bright still, and the background looks gray. So I am gonna have to take this picture not metered at the 0, but I'm gonna go towards the negative to darken this up. So your goal here, guys, is to play with your light meter and get your image, the background of your image, to look black. So I just put it at a -2, like I went really far into the negative, and it darkened up my backdrop right away. I'm gonna go even further. It's stopping at the -2, but if I keep scrolling to the right, it's going to darken my image even more. So that's a little too dark. I can put my light a little closer too, if I want to brighten it. Maybe just try some different angles here. And really play with the lighting. And you can hear my slow shutter speed, but it doesn't matter because my camera is on the tripod. Okay, for this next one I've chosen a colored backdrop. Now, I like to choose a color that will go complement my items that I'm photographing. This I thought will be good with the green because the two characters have some green in them. I know you're limited because you only have the color that I've given you, but you can try different kind of fabrics, cloths, whatever you want to in the background. Just make sure it's seamless, so it's curved, and that you have thought it out what would look best with your image. So with this one, I'm going to use a really low f-stop, and I'm going to highlight his hand that's reaching out, holding the army guy, and that's going to be nice and sharp with the villain's face kind of blurred in the background. So to get him to blur out in the background, I'm going to have to use a low f-stop. So I'm going to set my camera to a low f-stop. Still, my ISO is low at a 1 or 200. And then I'm going to add some light. We always need some light. And then I'm just going to play with how I'm focusing this. So remember, I can diffuse the light with a cloth. I'm going to try that here. I know it's pretty bright. So for this, I put a little piece of tape on his foot. Just make sure it's not visible. But remember, it will be more exaggerated the further away objects are from each other. So I'm gonna do this. I'm focusing in on his hand. So I'm gonna make my tripod a little bit taller with the legs here. Just gotta get them a little taller. And I'm still horizontal, but I could flip my tripod if I wanted to do like a vertical. I could do that too. I kind of like the cast shadow that's happening just from the natural light here that's coming from my window. So you could use a window too for your light source as well, but you do need a light source. Okay, I'm gonna see what this looks like. It's metered at 0. It's actually pretty cool. I'm gonna really play with my focus. I'm in manual focus now, so I can have full control over what is being sharp. Let's try this with the cast shadow. So cast shadow is always at interest. I'm gonna readjust my light meter. Oh yeah, that's really cool. So I can just kind of play with how that blurs out. Oops. Now for this one, I'm playing with the rule of odds using 3 different objects. I could use 5 different objects. I don't have a lot of space to work here, so I'm using 3 cameras and just kind of playing with the depth of the objects that I'm placing here. So I kind of laid out the bottom of my backdrop much longer than the top because the objects aren't that tall, and I really need some depth here to show my f-stop. So here I've got them spaced out. These are all very spread out. So play with composition. If I want to for white backdrop, you might want to turn the overhead lights on. It'll really brighten it up. I'm going to go back here a little bit and get a little wider composition. Zoom in, get it nice and focused. Now let's see what happens if I use a low f-stop, which is already set at. I'm still in the low ISO. My camera moved, so it was a little blurry, so I just took it again. That actually looks pretty nice. I don't have a light on it yet, so let's add a light. My cameras were kind of far apart, so I'm going to try the overlapping compositional aspect we talked about before. Just having them overlapping and touching a bit is going to make this more interesting. And I'm standing back here, holding my light above it. So I'm going to try this again. And I'm going to try this at a low f-stop. And just to experiment, I'm also going to try it at a higher f-stop. Get it nice and sharp. Because in this picture now, the lens is closest to the camera is the sharpest, and then it kind of blurs out. But it's not dramatic enough, so I think they all need to be maybe less blurry. So I'm actually going to use a higher f-stop instead. So I'm going to hold the AV plus or minus button, go to like maybe an F11. You don't have to go all the way to the highest because your shutter speed is going to get very slow the higher you put your f-stop. So shouldn't matter because you're on a tripod, but just so you don't bump the camera or something, I'm going to just do F11 should be plenty. You can just experiment with that. It's very slow. Still taking the picture. And everything is sharp in an F11. So I can just go ahead and play with these and play with the positioning. Maybe I stack them to overlap them. It's much easier to get depth in your pictures if you have smaller objects too. So I'm going to do one more. Try to get, not to get the edge of the backdrop. I'm going to move my camera in a little because I'm getting the bottom edge. Tilt my camera up a bit. Make sure it's nice and sharp. And meter the light every time you take the picture. It's a very slow shutter speed. Still taking the picture. Oh, I kind of moved my light around. You want to make sure your light stays still. Otherwise your cast shadow might be blurry. All right. And then if I want a little more depth, maybe I want to try a smaller object, because it'll be a bit easier to show depth with smaller objects. So you could use little things like, I have these little blocks. And just to show different colors, this is a great way to practice. So find some things around your house, play with different f-stops, play with different lightings, and play with different arrangements, just to see the effects. I know you're practicing a lot here, but kind of see how much will the block blur out if you use different f-stops. How can you align these to look really interesting? This is kind of creating a nice little reflection as well. So how do I want the light to look? Let's try this. Now right now the C block is nice and sharp. The other ones kind of get blurry as they go into the background. I can really exaggerate this blur with a low f-stop. Meter the light every time. And I could really exaggerate it even more by spreading these out and having more distance in between them. And I can choose to focus on the first block and make that sharp, or I can change my focus to make it on the last block. So right now the C sharp, but now if I'm in manual focus, I can just move the tip of my lens and get the end of my, the T to be sharp, and then the C and the 6 kind of blur out. So it'll give you shallow depth with a low f-stop, depending on where you're focusing. You can blur the foreground or the background. It's just going to blur wherever you're not focusing with a low f-stop.